glad to have you on the show today. Welcome to Live with Metamona.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We met at NFT NYC. It was
Yeah.
this very brief sideline interview, and you shared some really insightful topics with me. That's really stayed with me ever since. And I've been wanting to just have you on the show and just give us a little bit more time to explore some of those topics today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So before we dive in though, I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to my mainstream audience and tell them a little bit about yourself and how did your journey start on Web3?
Yeah. So first of all, my name is Idan Zuckerman. I'm one of Upland's co-founders and the co-CEOs. Our journey actually started really early on. So it was probably like mid 2018. Just where NFT as a technology basically debuted. And before anybody knew what it meant, right? And we are kind of like myself and my co-founder Dirk. We come from kind of like very complementary backgrounds. Where Dirk was coming more from the decentralized technologies and an economic background. I was coming from the consumer products and gaming field, and we kind of like collectively looked together at that brand new technology, right? NFT. What does it mean? And it kind of like it takes a bit to understand the value proposition, but once you understand it, you also understand that the future of digital economies will never be the same. There's no going backwards. Once a digital item can be truly owned, there are trillion of dollars of industries just waiting to be disrupted. And this was basically the baseline. We were actually playing Monopoly together, and then we kind of like it dawned on us that we want to build this metaverse that is based on an open economy, true ownership of every digital assets, but it is also mapped to the real world, where basically the notion of, I mean, again, any metaverse needs a notion of space, and in Upland the notion of space is actually mapped to the real world. So that is the kind of like the underlying basically background for Upland. But from there, it's just over the past 4.5 years, we've been embarking on this amazing journey of kind of like turning this into a real full-fledged metaverse that is super super accessible. And again, we've taken a lot of efforts to obfuscate all the difficulties of basically of implementing true ownership via blockchain technology, and making it super super easy for the end player to just come on board, enjoy the value proposition of true ownership, but don't have to worry about things like private keys and wallets and stuff like that. So it's a super intuitive, immersive experience, super accessible. The on ramps and off ramps are really really simple, so you can you don't have to deal with cryptocurrency. You can get into the economy using US dollars, and you can get out of the economy using US dollars as well, if that's what you choose to do. And again, everything is super super easy, and also regulatory compliant. And today in the past year or so, regulation has been a very hot topic. But from the beginning, we knew that we wanted to hit mass consumer audiences, and we've built this ecosystem to be compliant in the US also, and by that virtue, also the rest of the world as well. So again, I'm mumbling on, but I can talk for hours. So maybe I'll
No,
take a pause for a breath here.
but this is exactly why I wanted you to come on the show, because earlier you said no keys, no wallet, and we're going to touch on this. But Upland, for me, has been a Web3 project that I personally have been keeping a very close eye on, because you guys are incorporating key Web3 features like GameFi, NFTs, ownership, gamification of assets in a very unique way that's really balanced, if you will. And you've figured out a way, at least in my opinion, to really attract a lot of Web2 users. And that's something that a lot of Web3 projects right now are struggling with. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Upland is also one of the largest metaverse to date. I'm correct on that, right? Check,
Yeah, I mean,
stat check.
yeah. So first of all, it depends on definition of a metaverse. Like you can argue that Fortnite and Grand Theft Auto are metaverses to some extent, and by that virtue, we're no closer to their scale. We are by a lot of metrics the biggest Web3 metaverse. So we have, some anywhere around 30 to 50,000 daily active humans that interact with our system every day. So again, it's if you compare it to huge games, it's small, but if you compare it to Web3 metaverses, it's pretty big. So again, it kind of like depends on or how you define exactly what is Web3, what is metaverse, etc.
Was Upland the first mobile metaverse? Because I know we have Web3 gaming mobile, but was Upland the first mobile metaverse app?
Definitely the first Web3. And again,
Right.
it touches on how exactly do we define metaverse, and I can speak with you about that for 30 minutes at least. By the way,
Of
what is exactly
course.
the definition? But yeah, Upland is absolutely the only Web3 metaverse I'm aware of that is on not just on mobile devices, but also available on the iOS App Store and on the Google Play Store as well. Um,
My favorite part of all this, I mean, we're going to go through a lot of these features that make you guys so unique, but what is my favorite part of all this, and you touched this earlier, is that Upland is doing Web3 gaming without an external traded token, right? I'm correct about that, right?
you're absolutely correct. Yes.
To me, that's mind blowing. And I'm going to have you share your strategy there with us. But that's really what sets you guys apart. But first, I want to have you maybe introduce Upland to our viewers. And I also want to hand over the keys, the Restream keys over to you, and see if you could do maybe a quick demo for us, just for those who've never seen Upland to kind of get their eyes ready to what the platform looks like. Could we do that?
Absolutely, yeah. This is Upland. So I'm currently sharing from my desktop device just because it's easier, but Upland is a mobile first game. So, these interfaces are basically meant to be mobile, but are also playable on desktop devices. And Upland, as I said, it's a metaverse that is mapped to the real world. And you can see here that, all these cities that have things going on in them, these are the open cities. So Upland is not open anywhere you want to play, just because, again, it's kind of like we are careful curators of the upland economy, and we can only expand the world, and kind of like we need to manage supply and demand as the economy grows. So I think today we're open about in 30 cities. Some cities in the US, we have here Rio de Janeiro and Buenos Aires in South America. In Europe, we have Porto, and then London and Berlin. And then we also have we had a small activation also in Qatar, in conjunction in partnership with FIFA for the 2022 World Cup last year. So this is basically where Upland is active, and I'm gonna scroll here. So this is me, this little small gorilla here. And I currently live in Los Angeles. So in Upland, again, at the very base, it started out as a property trading game, and this is my home right now, right here. So I'm gonna focus in.
So that's live.
Yeah, that's live. This is the game, and
Right.
as you can see, I own this address, which is 6422 Nagel Avenue in LA, and again, so like the game we all know, Monopoly, right? All these parcels of land, these are owned by real people. So this is my neighbor here, again, Upland Dinger. And once I own any property, I'm also free to do whatever I want with it. So I can build on top of it. So this is the small house that I built on it. I can decorate it. I can park my car. This is, by the way, my car here. You know, you can kind of like see how it looks like, what's its racing stats in case I want to go race it, which I'll show you in a second. And again, the important thing here is that any digital asset in Upland, so it can be if you can see here, this is my Apex balance. This is my virtual currency. I have currently 4,320 Apex coins. And my properties, my home, my car, these are all assets that are notarized on the blockchain, right? So every asset in the Upland economy, whether it's a fungible or a non-fungible token, every digital asset is either a fungible or a non-fungible token, which I, as a player, truly own. What does that mean? It means that Upland, as the operator, cannot access your digital assets without the player's explicit permission. And this also means that I can basically trade any of my assets with other players. I can do it for the virtual currency, Apex, or I can do it directly for US dollars or other fiat currencies. So for example, these properties that are marked in green, these are up for sale. So I can just click on them and I can see, okay, this player asks $280 for this property. And so he's selling it directly for fiat currency.
Idan, the availability of the land is real time, correct? I'm trying to connect the realism to this.
Absolutely. So again, we kind of like consider Upland as the fork of the real world, right? So it doesn't necessarily reflect the real world, but every time that we introduce a new city to the game, we kind of like parcelize it. So we create those land parcels that match real world addresses one to one. So they reflect exactly that address in the real world. But then once the city is released, players are then able to go and mint those properties for for the first time, right? So in Upland today, probably 85 to 90% of the properties are minted. But here and there, you're going to find, okay, this is a good example. This is a property that hasn't been minted yet. So nobody has claimed ownership on it. So I can theoretically go there with my block explorer, which is that little gorilla, and then be able to buy it. And it will cost me 11,175 Apex coins to mint it. Today, most cities in Upland are sold out. So if I go to either San Francisco or Manhattan or other places, like the probably 70 to 80% of the cities in Upland, you can't go into the primary market. If I'm interested in going to San Francisco and buying a property, I would need to acquire it in the secondary market. So I would need to
I
buy
see.
it from another player, either for Apex or for US dollars. And by the way, the same goes to other assets, such as, for example, cars. And again, to date, since our launch, players have sold to each other more than probably 10 to 11 million dollars worth of assets. Again, so
That's incredible. And let me ask you this, because what it looks like to me is that everything in Upland revolves around NFTs, right? With digital assets representing digital real estate. Why is digital real estate important here? What is the advantage or the added value that you saw with digital real estate in Web3 here?
that's a great question, and the answer is it allows for a couple of things. Number one is the concept of virtual localities, right? And this is also some of the reason why in Upland, unlike a lot of other games and metaverses, we've put friction into travel. So if I'm now here in LA and I want to travel to San Francisco, New York City, or London, right? I can't just magically teleport, right? I would need to either take a train if I'm able to, or a plane if I need to go overseas or long distance, or I can use my actual car to drive in between. But it would take me both time and resources to get there. Now, why is this important? Beyond just the level of immersion that is important here, this strengthens the notion of virtual localities. So now in Upland, it actually matters who my neighbors are. Where do I choose to have my home address, which also gives me voting rights? Because I can own property in multiple cities, but I can only have one single home address, and this is usually where my local community would be. Where kind of like the most time that I spend in this metaverse will happen. And now it matters about the land around me, the neighbors around me, right? If I connect with like-minded individual in local communities and start building these amazing neighborhoods with factories and businesses and cafes and places to interact, and I increase that value of that space because of my contributions, right? That exactly, now it's crucial to understand why you need that space to begin with. Because if I could magically just teleport, right, I could live whatever in Hawaii or in some desolated place, and I could just magically move into wherever I want to, right? But now that you have these all of these mechanisms to support the mechanics of the metaverse, this strengthens the notion of space and why it is important, because it creates finality, it creates the notion of virtual communities, and it creates the very, very important of any economy, which is entrepreneurship. And again, if you go back like to economists, from early on, right, there are a couple of important elements you need in to build a successful economy, and some of them are basically the land, the labor, and the entrepreneurship. And once you have all three, you can start envisioning how economies are more than just speculative. They are about the notion of creating value, casting value, and then capitalizing on that value as well.
That's incredible because I mean, then you're also introducing the advertisers at some point to come in and take advantage of this economy as well, right? And we're going to talk about true ownership because that's what Web3 really stands for. But another thing that stood out to me as you were talking, what's unique here, I feel like you guys have this super app, right, that allows for the gamification of assets by offering almost a platform. Because yes, I mean, you can come buy real estate here, but what's also very unique is that you're allowing for developers to come on the platform and build games, correct?
Absolutely, and it's more than just build games. So we've taken, from the very beginning, but we implemented it actually starting in the past 12 months. We wanted to create an ecosystem that is completely open, right? And like you look at games today, you look at some of the metaverses, like you look at the vision of, companies like Meta, right? When they envision the metaverse, they envision, closed gardens and walled gardens where they decide, on everything. We envisioned a completely open system that is owned and run by players, and it's open on multiple elements here. So the first one, first of all, is true ownership, open economy, the ability to basically do what you see fit with your assets. But more than that, it's the ability to create assets, right? So any class of NFTs in Upland, we also allow players to actually create them on their own, and they need to use resources for that. So I can, for example, if Upland produces cars, right, players are also able to create car factories and design their own cars and eventually sell them also to other players as well. And similar to other types of NFTs, if it's structure ornaments or wearables that I can then use when I immerse myself in Upland, etc. So this is the first element of the openness. But then we've also allowed anybody, right, to connect to our system and expand it, right? So the way we do it is also very unique. So usually when you have gaming platforms such as, let's say, Roblox, you can develop for Roblox, but you're confined to their ecosystem. So you have to develop using their tools, and you have to deploy your products inside of Roblox, and everything looks basically like Roblox. We took a completely different approach here. We said we are agnostic to the client tools you use. It doesn't matter. You can use Upland as a launching point, as your infrastructure for the economy, for the identity system, for the resources, for the space and the land, right? For the kind of like mechanics that run it, but then you can build on top of it and expand it using any client platform. And the way
Wow.
it's done is that you connect to our APIs as a developer on the backend. So you can actually basically create any experience you want. And we had the first probably 5 or so games and experiences that have connected to Upland launched recently in the past couple of months, and they are phenomenal. And it's amazing. We're blown away by the things that the community come up with.
I can
But again,
imagine, yeah.
we allow you to basically pull any information you want, including being able to just reconstruct Upland like with all the information. And what we hope for at the end of the day is that the developer community outdoes Upland as an experience creator and create even better experiences based on our world. And at the end of the day, again, I think when we vision the future of the metaverse, it's so important that we strive to the fact that it's open and user owned and not kind of like big corporate owned. And at the end of the day, this is not something egalitarian. We truly believe that this will create the best ecosystems, and that are going to be also very, 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 very much profitable from a business perspective. Because at the end of the day, if you have a thriving economy, right, and it's player owned, there's plenty of opportunity to actually to actually generate real world economic activity based on it. And it's those big platforms that become the biggest companies of the future at the end of the day. And it doesn't mean that the corporates need to control everything. We truly believe that when players control everything, when players have the freedom to expand and create whatever type of businesses and endeavors on top of this platform, this will also translate to kind of like financial success also for the operator.
Gosh, I feel like I want to bring you back for another session just talking about metaverse and what that ideal metaverse looks like. But we have a bunch of topics here to address for today. So, for another day for sure. But I want to go back to the idea of GameFi because Upland has really achieved GameFi, like we were saying earlier, you were saying it earlier, without the need for external tradable tokens, without the need for wallets and keys. And these are the things, elements that the mainstream audience is just, it's not palatable to them. They don't really like to mess with it or deal with it. And yet you still are creating ownership. You're still offering ownership. There's still an economy and there's a gameplay. And that's what makes Upland really unique to me. Can you share with us, how do you accomplish this closed economy without an external token? This has been mind blowing to me.
Yeah, so I think to understand that, I think we need to go a bit back to our earliest days. And, we obviously, when we started out and we talked about, the concept of creating this open economy where every asset is truly owned and, players are able to trade with themselves. Again, I personally come from the gaming industry, all right. And when we looked at trying to figure out solutions, we immediately thought, okay, we'll do NFTs on Ethereum and we'll do it like everybody else. But then we quickly realized, this is not something that's sustainable, at least for the next, 5 to 10 years, because again, first of all, number one, players want to interact predominantly with through mobile devices, right? So we knew we absolutely had to have this offering available through, but not limited to, these mobile devices. But then if you think about it again, if I'm interacting in this transactional ecosystem that is backed by blockchain, if I would need to go there and, let's say, collect my earnings or kind of like do a small trade with another player, if I had to pay gas for each and every transaction, if I had to pay whatever, let's say, even if it's like a couple of cents every time I want to do this type of transactions, it's a non-starter for the vast majority of average consumers. So again, we knew we had to solve this somehow, and not even to going into the prospect of creating wallets and passphrases and passphrases and stuff like that. Moreover, we also knew that we wanted to be able to market this offering to US based players, right? There's no reason why to exclude such a huge market from this type of a potential offering. So from the very, very, very beginning, we knew that in order to achieve that, we had to design this very clever ecosystem, and we will have to make some compromises. And one of the
Mhm.
compromises were that the token will not be able to be tradable outside of Upland. Because again,
Mm.
if it was tradable, that would have put us on a completely different definition. It turns us from a game into an
Yeah.
actual kind of like cryptocurrency type of a thing, right? So
Yeah.
our solution was, okay, we're going to create this ecosystem. The compromise is that there are some restrictions, meaning you can't just trade token. But what that allowed us to do is to legally and safely offer our users very, very easy ways to go in to the ecosystem with using fiat currency, but then also
Mm.
to trade any, not their virtual currency, but any NFT that they own, they would be able to sell directly and very, very easily in a trustless way in an open economy directly for US dollars. And that's kind of like the framework. It took us a lot of time to basically invest and come up, and we had some very great partnerships that enabled us to kind of like execute this thing. For the longest time, I remember in the first years, players didn't believe that we'll allow them to sell directly for dollars, right? They just didn't believe it would
Yeah.
happen. And then one day, flip the switch with a great partnership that we have with our partner that kind of like maintains the funds for our players. And bam, it was there. And now you can easily just put any NFT on sale for US dollars, one click of a button from a buyer, and it's yours. And then you can pull it to your PayPal account magically and easily. Now, one thing we've
Yeah.
discovered is that one interesting upside for doing this is that this kind of like keeps away, to some extent, speculators from the ecosystem. Because just because you can't trade the currency outside of the platforms, there's no way that you can speculate on Apex. So now
Right.
it's a bit more protective also of the economy, because there's a much bigger chances that the people that interact with the economy actually have an interest in there. They don't just park money and hope that it will be of some value at some point. They actually have to work and interact with the game in order to see success, right?
Yep.
And I think this is very crucial. And when we kind of like saw the bear market coming, so that element was actually, players were really thankful for it, because maybe in the hype days, our currency wasn't hyped because it can't be traded outside. So maybe we missed on that. But then in the downturn, players were really appreciative that the economy is a bit protective.
And it just makes it so much easier, especially because it's also evident that GameFi has created this imbalance, right, in Web3 gaming, and it's doing that, in my opinion, by mixing intrinsic and extrinsic motivations for players to play the game. Intrinsic motivation being I play the game because it's fun. Extrinsic motivation being I play the game because I can earn, right? And you guys seem to have found this balance between the two in this closed economy. Why is everybody having such a hard time with this to achieve this balance?
Yeah, so I think it's a matter of looking at it either top down or bottom up, right? And again, the
Right.
way we looked at it, I would frame it a bit differently. It's not about figuring out how to let players earn in a GameFi setting. It's the other way around. So again, open economies were always there, and they were always super difficult to achieve. And again, whatever you can imagine, that the mother of all open economies was probably, or still is, Second Life, for example, right? Again, we did not invent open economies for games, but our hypothesis was, okay, if we take open economies, but we also introduce the notion of true ownership, which we think is critical. Again, at the end of the day, we think like, you know up until now, for the past whatever 50 years, there were digital assets, right? But they were never truly owned. Now
Mhm.
humanity has invented this wonderful thing that's called true ownership of digital assets, right? We understand that looking into the future, every digital asset that anybody cares about will be truly owned one way or another, either NFTs or some kind of like an evolution of that technology. So once you understand that, it doesn't, it stops becoming a question of how do I kind of like inject earn into games. No, it's the other way around. How do I empower players to actually own their digital assets,
Mm,
right? And then
right.
as part of the intuitive offering of gameplay or of platforms. And what we are claiming is that at the end of the day, once these value propositions will win over the non-truly owned value propositions, because players will start understanding why is it important and start playing more and more those games and platforms that allow for true ownership. So right, so
Hmm.
so it's not about how do I get people to earn, it's about how do I deliver the value of true ownership of digital assets to mass consumer audiences within these settings. And it's not easy, again, just because open
Right.
economies are much harder to design and maintain compared to pseudo fake economies.
Well, you bring up a very good point, because when people own an NFT, they, say digital land in this case, they ask themselves, well, what else can I do beside owning this digital asset? Can I lease it? Can I rent it? Does it give me voting rights? Because Web3, like you said, that its added value is true ownership. What would you say drives true ownership in this case with the Upland experience?
So when you say what drives what drives true ownership is the technology, is the underlying
Right.
technology, right? But are you asking maybe like what value does it give to the
Yes,
player?
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's exactly the point. Because and by the way, if it's not tied to an open economy and a free market, then there's no value proposition. But the value proposition is basically that I now, as somebody who truly owns a digital asset, I don't need to rely on the favors of the operator to let me do what I want with that asset, right? Like
Hmm.
if you kind of like went today and bought a car, right? If you had 10 dealerships, but one of them, sold you the car, but say, hey, you know what? You're not going to be able to resell it after you're done with it. Would you even consider buying it? Right? You
Yeah.
wouldn't.
Right.
But why would you consider buying a digital asset, right? That again, it may not be as expensive as a car, but it's still something you spend your well earned money on it. Like it's mind. The only reason that we accept it as human beings is because that has always been the case up until NFTs were invented, right? Because there
Right.
was no way for you to truly own it. It was always on somebody's servers, and whoever owned that server owned that asset. And now true
Right.
ownership is changing that, right? So the mix of being able to truly own an asset, not having anybody being able to do anything with it without your explicit permission and signature, mixed together with the ability to resell that asset and realize its value,
Mm.
that creates infrastructure. And now this is the most interesting part. And this was our hypothesis from the beginning. We envisioned that when players understand that the digital assets carry tangible value and they can do whatever they want with it, they would be much more emotionally connected to it, and will be much more prone to invest in it and be kind of like active in it, and kind of like act to, either evolve it or nurture it if it's like a local community or a neighborhood. And we've seen this time and again, right? The
Yeah.
notion of true ownership strengthen your connection with the asset compared to a not truly owned asset. And that's why we are
Absolutely.
big believers that the attention and the focus of any human that engages in digital economies over the next whatever 15 years will slowly but surely shift to these experiences that offer true ownership, right? Again, just
Yeah.
because of that
Yeah.
value proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. And what better way to do that with digital land, right? Especially when you bring that emotional ownership into it. I think people really relate to that.
I think digital land is the infrastructure, right? But it's not
Right.
enough. I mean, there are
Right.
countless, endless amount of projects that sell digital land, and that's fine. That's a good, it could be a good starting point. But also, by the way, I would caution, like, to see, if you're looking at a project, look, maybe ask yourself, is it a top-down project? Did it start out
Hmm.
by selling all its digital land, and now they're just sitting down to write something and try to cast value, or is
We
it
have
something that
projects like that. You're
yeah, yeah,
absolutely
of course,
right. Yeah.
and that's natural. And by the way, it doesn't mean that that they can't be successful. It can absolutely be, but it may carry some kind of like a risk at that point. But again, that's why I'm saying the land is the infrastructure, right? It needs to be there, but it's necessary but not sufficient to achieve
Yeah.
kind of like a thriving economy. You need to have more on top of it, right? You need to allow participants to actually do something with that land, right? And again,
Yes.
in Upland for the past 5 years, every single month we've been adding more and more opportunities how to use that land and to capitalize. It may not be still enough because Upland is still in development, but it's definitely a thriving, and there's so many opportunities for you to actually engage in that platform, and kind of like where your land gets brought in front and center. So if I'm racing, and I can show you also a demo if you're interested. If I'm now
Yeah,
racing
absolutely.
through the yeah, maybe let me share my screen as
Yeah, let me. This is a land that somebody owned that they are able to do this on their land, correct? They built this on their land.
Absolutely, and more than that. So, Upland has the concept called meta ventures. Meta ventures are player-run businesses. One of the meta ventures is a speedway, right? So I can create a racetrack in Upland, and by the way, the beautiful thing is that any street, any highway can become a racetrack. And if I own at least 3 properties along the racetrack, I could set it up, put together the racetrack, and then have people race on my racetrack and generate revenues from these races. Because in Upland, you can also play for stakes. You can actually race people and kind of like put apex on the line for who gets to win it. So this is one concept, and but it's not just that meta venture. Imagine
Hmm.
now a successful racetrack. So this one specifically is in San Francisco. You can see the kind of like
That's
the Transamerica building in the
yeah.
background. And imagine now this racetrack passes. So let me just play this for a second. And we're gonna pass
This
by
is
different properties that are built in kind of like that are owned by different people. Now imagine if I have a very successful racetrack and I put now a billboard somewhere, right? So
hmm.
now the person who has property on that racetrack can actually capitalize it and
Of
kind of like
course.
be successful because of the success of that racetrack, right? So that's kind of like just one underlying element here. And by the way, this is an example of an external app. So even though this was developed by Upland, this was
Hmm.
developed as a third-party app, and you can see this is a Unity game, not kind of like not similar to Upland native, but this is a reconstruction of Upland based on open APIs that kind of like serves as kind of like what can a layer 2 experience look like in Upland, right? So it uses the same
Absolutely.
the same NFTs, the assets, etc. And I'll give you another example, maybe. So when
Yeah.
this race ends,
Idan, are the NFTs, the cars in this case, interoperable?
it's a fantastic question, and I can spend another hour talking about interoperability. And
I'm
by the way,
telling
again,
you,
we
you're going to have to come back.
yeah, and by the way, again, I don't know if you've heard about OMA 3, the Open Metaverse Alliance for Web 3.
I have it on my topics to ask you about the article that came out 2 days ago. So we're going to talk about that.
OMA 3 is, again, something close and dear to our hearts. We actually co-founded and co-initiated that with some other companies. Today, OMA 3 has more than 1,000 companies that have signed up. It's basically a consortium with the aim to map out standards for the future open metaverse. And to your question about interoperability, listen, interoperability is technically easy, right? Especially with NFTs. If you build your NFTs correctly and make them, publicly reproducible, it's not hard to take one asset from one world and put it in another. But the problem starts with, if you look at Upland cars, right? They look like in a certain style. What happens if I try to take that car and put it in Minecraft, for example? Minecraft is a
Hmm.
voxel world. It's just not
Hmm.
going to fit. So while interoperability is possible on the technical level, there needs to be something logical to enable it if we really want to talk
Hmm.
about true interoperability. And we are actually thinking about this day and night, and we're actually coming up with new solutions that may be relevant for the more distant future. But again, interoperability is close and dear to our hearts, but not just as a buzzword, but actually as trying to figure out how to actually get there in the future.
And we're going to talk about the OMA 3 article because we're talking about interoperability of digital assets, but they're talking about and introducing the interoperability of us, humans, going from
Yeah.
one dimension to another, which is a whole different conversation. I know you want to show me something here. While you're pulling that up, I just want to ask, we do have a question that I want to show. Does Upland have plans to take advantage of AR technology with Apple Vision Pro coming out soon? You and I talked about AR, AI actually, at NFT NYC. I'm going to let you answer that question there.
Yeah. So first of all, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. But here's is again the brilliance about why we feel really, really good about the path we've chosen. Because of the fact that Upland is open and expandable and agnostic to the client tools that are used, Upland is actually one of the few platforms that, yeah, I can say, yeah, we have our plans, whatever, in the next 3 years to launch AR experiences. But if you're a developer and you want to beat us to it, you can absolutely build your own experience using something like the Apple Vision Pro, connect it to Upland, and just seamlessly introduce it as part of the offering and beat us to it. And that's exactly the part of the open nature. Because again, if you look about any other closed platform, you would have to wait, let's say, for Roblox, for example, to
Mm-hmm.
implement Apple Vision Pro to it, so you're able to develop for it. In Upland, everything is completely open, and because everything can be transformed into 3D, and you could be, so maybe it's a good time to present kind of like the cafe. So I'll maybe if you want to
Yep,
put that on the screen.
there
So
we
this is
go.
an example of, again, in Upland I also have my 3D avatar, and I can kind of like get immersed in this this is an actual structure in Upland. I think it's in no, it's in Manhattan, if I'm not mistaken. And here I'm kind of like
Hmm.
interacting with some of my teammates in the metaverse.
Hmm.
But you can imagine, again, this is now basically, this is a 3D world, right, manifested, and I am experiencing it in third person, but there's no reason whatsoever why I won't be able to then, connect with a different device that is fully immersive, and then make it into a virtual reality type of an experience. Now, moreover, now here's the really,
Hmm.
really interesting. So let me just stop saying this. So you know, because Upland is mapped to the real world, now you can imagine not just VR experiences like fantasy worlds, but actual AR experiences. And the brilliant thing, the thing I liked most about Apple's announcement, right, the thing that blew my mind and kind of like just made me really, really happy, is that with the Apple Vision Pro, it's kind of like a seamless device. Right? You put it on, you see the real world, but then you can see screens and whatever. But they were like really forward-looking enough to envision this thing, this scrollable button that provides a gradient of immersion, right? And now, because Upland is mapped to the real world, imagine for a second, if I walk now in the real street, I can put on an Apple Vision Pro, and if I go full immersion, I'm still walking that street, right? But around me,
Yeah.
I see Upland, right?
Yeah.
Exactly as I'm walking that street. Now, I probably won't want to do it because I'll get run over by a car within the first 5 minutes.
I was
So,
just going to say, this is calling for a
right.
disaster right here.
Exactly. But imagine now that gradient. Now I notch it down a bit, right? So maybe
Yeah.
when I'm riding in the passenger seat of a car, I can go full
Yeah.
immersion and see Upland. But if I'm walking, I can go half immersion. Okay, now I can see the real world, but I can see elements from Upland. If there's suddenly a treasure in the street that I can collect, I'll see the treasure,
Yeah.
but I still see my surrounding. But it was still perfectly mapped to Upland. So again, Upland is one of these few platforms, and again, because of it seems trivial that it's mapped to the real world, but it gives so much potential benefit that the land is actually tied one-to-one with the physical space. There are so many opportunities for how to basically create value around that thing, and that includes also augmented reality.
That's amazing. And I know that's coming real soon here. I want to take us back real quick with some of the challenges that I see Web3 gaming brands are struggling with. I mean, Upland has about, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys have about 300,000 unique landowners. That's a big number. That's a big number. I want to
Yeah.
ask you about reward systems because I hear a lot about incentivizing and what is the best way of rewarding, let's say, the newbies, the mainstream. How do you guys go about incentivizing people outside of this space to attract this kind of number?
Yeah, so it's not easy. Again, especially with open-ended platforms where when you land for the first time, it's not 100% clear to you what you need to do. There's a lot of intricacies to and a lot of kind of like rabbit holes you can go down into for the experience. But in terms of incentives, at the end of the day, I think if you cross the barrier of the fact that okay, you are discoverable, let's say you're on the app stores, you have actual way to access a lot of players, the next thing you need to do is hit them with the value proposition, which is the most difficult part, right? So it's not going to be about how can you get in and within a couple of months become rich. That's not going to be a value proposition, because if you give that value proposition, that means you are some kind of a pyramid, and at the end of the day, it will collapse, because again, an open economy, a real economy, it can't be ever inflating. There can be incentives, right? So just like, for example, in the real world, central banks today, if you look at interest rates, for example, they are at, whatever, you can get like 5-6% that the central bank gives you as an incentive to hold currency, right? The same thing goes to digital economies. That could be some of the incentive, but it's not enough. It has to be tied to an engagement proposition. Like, how can you engage in that platform, if it's a game, if it's a chat platform, whatever it is, how can you get either let's call it maybe entertainment value or any type of other value by participating in this kind of like ecosystem, beyond just the fact that you will earn from it, right? Earn needs to be a byproduct of being successful and being kind of like spending your time and resources in the game. It cannot be just a speculative
And
form,
having
unless
fun.
by the way, unless you're talking about, again, financial products. Yes, that's what they're for. Financial products are for speculative purposes at the end of the day, and most people I know interact with these type of financial products to one extent or another, be it stock option, like being the stock market, or cryptocurrencies, or some other stuff, and that's perfectly fine. Games are not designed for that. They need to go way, way, way beyond, right? You have to be able to come up with an offering that will capture and engage your audience.
Everyone in the Web3 space is asking, how do we disrupt? How do we get mainstream adoption? How do we get people in here? And you guys have shown this tremendous progress that kind of balances the, I would say, the three core concept that is needed to build a successful Web3 game. And I don't want to say what those three concepts are, but I want to ask you, what are those three essentials, because you've already named them,
Okay.
elements that you and your team are using to build this effective Web3 platform, metaverse game, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, so I mean, off the top of my head, I would say number one would be a strong economical foundation, and one that is
Right.
sustainable in the long term. The other is, I think, ease of onboarding tied together with some kind of like value proposition, right? So like
Mm,
ease of, you know, an easy way to get into it, but then a reason to
mm,
stay with it. And then I think like what would be the third one? I mean, probably beyond the offboarding, which is super important. So how do I
yeah.
actually create value and extract it? I think it's going to be, again, to me, if it's a platform, not necessarily a game, but if it's a platform like Upland, I think it would be the expandability and the fact that it's user owned. Because again, we've always seen time and again, if we rely on our own, relatively small team, there's only so much we can do to cast value into the platform. When you delegate that to an endless amount of potential people, suddenly you get like an explosive lift in the amount of value that you're able to deliver for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. So
Mhm.
again, if I had some more time to think about it, maybe I would come up with three
No,
different
you
ones, but I don't know how it matches your
no,
thoughts.
you've said it. You actually have said it. I mean, economy is one that we talked about. Gameplay is another one, which really goes back also into that value proposition that you were alluding to. And also, one thing that I see you guys do really well is economy. I don't know the stats right now, but I remember that you guys were number one game DAP on DAP radar. What is your economy strategy?
And again, another fantastic question, and I'll tell you a little anecdote. Again, our headquarters is in Mountain View in Silicon Valley. We really, really not far from Stanford University, and at the very, very early days, we thought, hey, we're gonna hit up some of the economy professors in Stanford. We're gonna sit with them, and they're gonna teach us how to build an open economy, right? And we actually did sit down with a couple
That's
with
actually
some.
brilliant. That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah. And we
Yeah.
sat with macroeconomic professors and microeconomic professors and some of their grad students and stuff like that. And what we came to realization really, really quick is that nobody knows how to do it, right? So like economy theorists, they're really good at analyzing things that happened and why they happened, but they are not very proficient at, there's no such thing as kind of like designing an economy from the beginning without knowing its parameters and how its participants behave, etc. So quickly we basically shifted our focus to what we put together, which is an ecosystems that have these levers, right, that you can
Mhm.
pull and push to basically support the economy through its different phases of, at the beginning it's like slim growth to hyper growth to sustainability to expansion, etc., etc. And these levers include things like, okay, how do you control supply and demand, right? What is that earning element that you can that should be assigned to owning properties, right? What is the exchange rate for apex to US dollars? What is the taxes that kind of like that stimulate this economy, right? So every time there's a transaction, there's some small transaction fee that goes in favor of the what we call the community pool. So all of
Mhm.
these elements, we need to be able to control them and to tweak them when
Mhm.
necessary in the different phases of the economy. So it's not about trying to understand from the beginning where your economy will end up. It's about giving yourself the tools and the chance to react and to kind of like help the economy shift itself as it develops. Now, we've always said that all the way to our white paper that when you're starting out a relatively small economy that is susceptible to outside influence, that's something that we as operators need and want to control. But at some point when the economy is big enough, that's something we would want to delegate to an independent party, because
Right.
at the end of the day, that creates even more trust in the economy, the
Mhm.
fact that kind of like it's not us calling the shots, but it's like an independent, probably meritocratic body that maybe gets elected by the community or some other type of governance, but they are independent in calling the shots, similar to like a central bank operates in real world economies.
Yeah, and by the way, DAOs is another topic that we could discuss here when it comes to building those economies. But what's really evident here is that Upland is more than just digital real estate. I mean, the value proposition here and the ownership, is definitely something that people should take a closer look at. One thing that I want to ask you, and I ask pretty much all the builders who come on my show, because in our space, we talk a lot about what we are building. But we seldom ask the question, why are we building it? So we don't really tend to focus on the why as much as we
Yeah.
focus on the what. So I want to ask you your why. Why are you building Upland?
To elevate people's digital lives, actually, to make them better, and that's the core why of why we're doing it.
I mean, you're doing exactly that, and to piggyback on that, 2 days ago, GamesBeat came up with the article titled "OMA 3 offers ways for users to travel between blockchain gaming worlds in the metaverse." And for those of you who are not familiar with OMA 3, they're a consortium of the top metaverse companies in Web3. And their mission is to build standards and infrastructure that enables user-owned and user-controlled metaverse. So now IWPS is planning to enable users to walk through interworld portals and travel among metaverses. And some of those metaverses are worlds, My Neighbor Alice Sandbox, Superworld, and Upland. Is this the vision? Is this the vision of Web3? Is this your vision? I wanted to get your feedback on this article, and especially because the metaverses are still empty, by the way.
Yeah, so first of all, is it my vision? Absolutely yes, and by the way, I'm an active participant in that working group. So for kind of like a portaling, and again, we need to understand this is not that tomorrow we'll be able to just jump from one world to another. This is about doing the very very difficult and slow work of putting together the standards that would enable that in the future. So yes, in the spirit of, again, I've spent probably 10 minutes talking about why I think, we want the future metaverse to be open and interoperable, and part of that is being able, again, at the end of the day, why are we excited so much about the metaverse? And again, this is not something new. Like, this has been envisioned in science fiction, in kind of like, novels like Snow
Mm-hmm.
Crash and movies like Ready Player One. uh, but it doesn't exist yet. What we have today is these different games and platforms and virtual worlds that are all siloed. They're all operate within their own ecosystem. The metaverse will exist once, I believe, by the way, and it's not going to be like a 0 and a 1, right? It's going to be like a gradient, a slow shift, when some of these worlds will start getting interconnected. And I think the first thing that will happen is the ability as a user, as a first person experience, to kind of like carry over your session, your experience from one world to another in a seamless way. This is the first time when we're going to start seriously talking about the fact that, okay, the metaverse with a big M exists, right? Now it's
Mm-hmm.
starting to form. And in order for that to form, standards such as IWPS need to be in place to enable it, right? Because it doesn't magically
Yep.
happen. You first have to create a standard. Then you need to get different worlds and games and platforms to actually adopt the standards and kind of like be able to accept it. Once that happens, you're going to start seeing the first interconnections, and it may not be beautiful. It may be kind of, if you remember, look at the World Wide Web, right? Look at what we have today and imagine how it started with the first versions of HTTP and what that looked like, right? It was
Yep.
seriously painful. It was slow. It was ugly, and the first
ARPANET.
experience.
I don't think anyone remembers ARPANET, but that's where it started. And it
Exactly,
was
right?
painful. Exactly,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. So you can imagine that these first experiences may not be the most fictionless or the most amazing, but they are going to allow, the first interconnectability between worlds, what would enable in the future the metaverse with a big game. And by the way, almost 3 operation is not limited just to Web3. We're actually participants in also the MSF, the Metaverse Standards Forum, where all kind of like very big Web2 companies are present, such as Microsoft and Meta and other companies as well. So our thoughts is to again actively work on implementing the vision, but also making sure that reaches a vast the vast population of the digital world and the gaming world, so that can be adopted.
That's fascinating. And I know we're still ways out to achieve that. But it just, when I saw Upland on that lineup, I said, you look at this. I'm meeting with Idan today. I'm going to ask him about how are we doing this? And is it too early? There's still so much that we have to figure out with interoperability. And we were talking about that earlier. And we're looking at the metaverses that are currently trying to figure out what that ideal platform looks like to keep people there and keep people engaged. We're still trying to figure that out. And here we are now talking about seamlessly going from one metaverse to another and just transporting people. It's mind-boggling what's ahead of us. Awesome to have you guys on this lineup. We are so running out of time, but I just have to introduce one project that you're working on. And I don't know why every time we talk, this ends up being a little soundbite. If you can shed some light on your Species Foundation NFT, that was such a cool project you introduced to me at NFT NYC. Will you talk about that briefly as we start to close here?
Yeah, absolutely, and that ties back exactly to what I said with the first efforts we're doing around interoperability. And again, the very short answer is that when you envision the metaverse in the future, it's going to comprise different worlds and virtual platforms. A lot of them will want to implement life into them, and it just makes absolutely no sense that each team on its own starts to kind of like solve that problem time and again, that same problem of implementing life and defining it, where also the result is not going to be interoperable. So we kind of like we are the body that kind of like initiated and is behind a decentralized effort that is called the Species Foundation. And the mission for that foundation is to map all species of life into digital form, to create a unified repository that can then be adopted by any game or virtual world in the future metaverse. And the way that the Species Foundation does it is about it's going to incentivize potentially an endless amount, hopefully tens of thousands of creators to together work on that problem and then enjoy royalties as their creations are being used throughout the metaverse. So that is the very short pitch, and there's a lot behind it.
Can I reserve the right to have you come back on this show and talk more about this project because it's so fascinating. It's so
Absolutely,
fascinating.
I'm happy to talk about it, and there's a lot to talk about. So
You guys have a huge fan base. I see a couple of messages here. Upland Kingdom is a blast, great utility, and rightfully so. You guys are doing some great stuff in this space. You are a visionary leading the way in the Web3 space. Upland, to me, really stands out as a unique project that really embraces Web3 features in a very balanced and eloquent way, if I may. I hope that this conversation was inspiring, not just for our users and viewers, but also for our Web3 builders as well, who I know are still trying to find their way around some of these Web3 features.
yeah, I mean, so we have a very very active Discord community, but we are actually moving all that engagement into the game. So now inside of Upland, you can chat, you can connect with players, you can actually go into cafes and immerse in kind of like in full immersion and hang out with players. My recommendation is that whoever's watching, if you haven't played Upland yet, please go to the nearest app store, install it. But then when you try it out, get in touch with our fabulous community, and they are always happy to kind of like help onboard new players and explain, because again, there's a lot to know about and to learn about, and there's tons of content and a lot of good people that are willing to help you onboard and become an active member of this community.
And that's what we love about Web3. It's each one teach one. When community is so willing to teach the newbies and the newcomers. Idan, thank you for joining me on the show today. I really, really appreciate your time and insight.
All right, thank you, man. It was a pleasure.
That is all the time we have for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed the discussion conversation as much as I did. I'll be back again next week with more hot topics in the metaverse. Until then, I'm your host, Madamona. Stay well.